Can you see my screen, all of you? I have shared my screen, started my recording also. So, let me start my switch 1, switch 2, switch 3 and switch 4. Once again, those who have joined, now we are doing root guard. Okay. Already I explained you yesterday about what is root guard. One minute, I am just configuring this so that the view is good and the fonts are also good. So, now you see I am having switch 1, switch 2, switch 3. Now, let us see who has become the root bridge. So, when I say show spanning tree, you can see that this switch has become the root bridge on the basis of low MAC address. We will manipulate the priority also, we will make it 4096. So when I say show spanning tree, you can see all his ports are designated and he has become the root bridge. Switch 1. Huh? So when I say show spanning tree, I can see that this guy is also having a root port towards the root bridge. So he is a non-root bridge and he is telling, the first paragraph always tells you about the root bridge. So he is telling my root bridge is 4096 plus if it is for VLAN 1 then it is 4097 and this is his root port, that is E0 by 1. Okay. So when I talk about switch 2, this is actually switch 2, okay, and this is switch 3. Now I go to switch 3 and say show spanning tree. There is some issue in the connection and got reset. I hope you can see the screen, all of you. Okay. So when I say switch 3, again here also it is E0 by, here it is E0 by 0 on switch 2, here it is E0 by 1 on switch 3, correct. So E0 by 0 and E0 by 1 is the root bridge. So let me write it down clearly so that we have a better understanding. Once again we are doing a topic called root guard, where I have like, so this is your root port. This guy is having a priority of 4096 and this guy is having a root port. Switch 2 and switch 3 is a non-root bridge, clear. So root port is there, okay. Now what happened, like if I introduce a new switch with the priority less than this, okay. Now all these switches are considered as what, non-root bridge. In fact, if I start switch 4, it is also a non-root bridge, okay. Okay, hello, now I am clear, voice is clear, okay. So I was telling that switch 1 has become root bridge on the basis of low priority, switch 2 is a non-root bridge, switch 3 is also a non-root bridge with 2 root ports. Switch 2 is also having a root port E0 by 0. Now in case if I come with switch 3 priority less than the one which is root bridge, so I say priority 0. So when I say priority 0 and say show spanning tree, you see I have become root bridge now, and switch 1 is telling my root bridge is so and so, and see he is also now having a root port. That means always remember, in a switch network the criteria for electing root bridge is nothing but bridge ID, and in bridge ID we have priority criteria which is in the which are in the multiples of 4096, and if the priority is low then that guy is going to become. So switch 1 was earlier root bridge, now suddenly you see when I change the priority of switch 3 he became the root bridge. So once again I will change the priority to regular one. So now once again my switch 1 will become what? Root bridge. Debug spanning tree events. Now I don't want switch 3 to become root bridge or any switch to become root bridge. I want only switch 1 should remain as a root bridge. Or okay, let's check what is switch 4 in the topology. 32772. So, switch 1, switch 2, switch 3, switch 4. Let us see. So, switch 4 is also telling my root bridge, and he is telling, see, always you see the 1000 MAC address. So, switch 1 carries this 1000 MAC address. This para shows you about the switch. This portion shows you about the local switch information. This is about the root bridge. So, you see both of them matches, that means he is the root bridge, like okay. So, now what will happen? We are going to configure root guard. Okay. So, what I will do? I will configure root guard on switch 2 as well as on switch 3. Why? Because you see switch 4 is connected via switch 2 also and switch 3 also. 4 links, redundant links are there. So, I will go to switch 2 on E1 by 0 and E1 by 1. I will go on switch 3, E 1 by 1 and 1 by 0. So, when I go on switch 2 and say show interface status, I can see all the ports are connected. Or when I say show spanning tree, one by 0 and 1 by 1 is there and they are in designated. Show spanning tree, one by 0 and 1 by 1 designated. What about switch 4? You see still he is a non-root bridge, he is accepting that, okay, he is having a root port. Now, what I will do? I will change the priority of VLAN 1 to 0. So, if I change the priority to 0, definitely he should become the root bridge and others should follow him. But let us see here. That means he was trying to send his BPD, superior BPD to switch 2, but switch 2 is still following this guy as a root bridge, and he did what? He placed the port in root inconsistent state. Can you see? E 1 by 1 and 1 by 0 is now in inconsistent state. See, if you remember my session, I told you there are many types of port. One is normal designated port where everything is allowed, bidirectional traffic, transmit, receiving, everything is done on that. That is the definition of designated, or you can say forwarding. Root port is a port towards root bridge, always getting you all the latest upgraded BPDUs after every 2 seconds, that is the hello timer. Okay, that is why this is the role of the root port. It is already connected to the root bridge, whichever shortest port is there, which is connected to the root bridge, receives BPDUs. So, that root port is still active. Now, if this guy try to disturb the whole network, switch 4, by sending them lowest priority, see, he himself is considering root bridge only. See, he is telling I am root bridge. It is okay, man. Like if I go home or if I stand in front of my building and shout I am the Prime Minister of this country, people will say yes, yes, you are the Prime Minister. Near that building I can shout, near my area also I can tell. Who is going to trust me, who is going to believe me? If I shout in my building, if I shout in my private place or home, it is okay. If I shout on the road also, people say he is gone mad. So, switch 4 is shouting that he is a root bridge, nobody is going to follow him. In fact, if you see switch 2, he is following this guy 1000. If you go to switch 3, he is still following this guy 1000 as a root bridge. They are not listening to what switch 4 is telling. In fact, they block. So, there is a term called what? Designated, there is a term called what? Forwarding, there is a term called what? Error disable, there is a term called what? Root inconsistent state. Root inconsistent state is a state where the port receives the BPDU from switch 4. That means he is able to send his BPDUs on these ports and they are listening to those BPDUs. In fact, they are checking these BPDUs, but they are not allowing these BPDUs to be given to any other switch. Suppose you have one more switch here, they are not allowing him. They are not allowing these BPDUs to go anywhere in the network. They are just putting it into root inconsistent state, a state where the switch 4 is allowed to send his superior BPDU to him, but he will not receive any data frames, any BPDUs from the root bridge. He is kind of isolated. So, if he is isolated, he can't access the servers or whatever PCs in the LAN network. He is like isolated. This is the beauty of root inconsistent state. Port is up. Like you see police take away criminals, the hardcore criminals, and then they start beating them. If you see movies and series, they will beat those criminals, but they will never tie their mouth. Why? Because they want them to speak. So, when they beat them and they ask them, tell me where you did this crime, when you did this crime, who was with you, they want the person to speak and they keep on beating, but later on the guy might frustrated or he get lot of pain from those beating, and then he immediately says stop, I am telling you, let me tell you, let me clarify, and then they stop beating. So, same way switch 4 is continuously sending BPDUs with superior priority, and these guys are beating him, telling this guy, switch 2 and switch 3 is not allowing his BPDU to reach anywhere. But now what is the outcome? Switch 4 came to know that he is isolated and he accepted his mistake and say okay, let me change my priority. I am not the superior one. So, when he change the priority, you see these guys are now lenient, they will leave him. Because every BPDU come after some time, now 2 seconds. So, when I say debug spanning tree events, they will be receiving, and now see immediately they gave a message that we are leaving this guy switch 4. Now, he is a good guy. Earlier he was telling I am a superior guy, and we know that superior guy is switch 1 only, he is our root bridge, this guy is not a root bridge. So, they will do what? They will remove this root inconsistent state from E1 by 0 and E1 by 1, gone. See, is being placed into learning now, he will be going into forwarding. Same way when you go to switch C, he also unblocked him. So, when the criminal, after getting lot of punches and kicks, he will say sorry, I will tell you what is the reason. So, same way now switch came to know his mistake, and he said okay, I will change my priority to 32,768. See, this normally happens in the network, or some, like you bring in some branch switch and connect it to another branch, and you never see the configuration there, you never see the priority there, and you connect it. So, once you come to know about the mistake, you can immediately change the priority and introduce that switch in the network. I hope this theory, the theory as well as practical which I showed you, understood. And also I told you what is the meaning of root inconsistent state, what is the meaning of error disable, what is the meaning of loop inconsistent state also. Loop inconsistent, yesterday somebody asked me what is loop guard. So, I told him I do not want this port to come up, I do not want this port to go into forwarding, from blocking to forwarding. So, I place this port into loop inconsistent state, a state where I am forcing this port to remain in block state and not allowing him to move from listening to learning and learning to forwarding. Clear? Any question, guys? Okay. This is the command, root guard. We will go on for, so I explain you, okay. There was one more topic like switch port analyzer, that is span, and RSpan, remote span. Now, normally we do span or RSpan for troubleshooting. We do it for troubleshooting, because sometimes we like, for example, somebody is trying to tap your phone. There is some legal reasons for that. They doubt that you are into some illegal activities, and for that reason they take a special permission from court and they tap your phone, whom you are calling, from where you are getting those calls secretly. So, when I say switch port analyzer, that is span, when we configure this span in the network, we are actually asking switch or requesting switch to send us those frames or send us those bidirectional communication going on between the PC and the server, as shown in the diagram. This normally we do it for troubleshooting in the network. We want to find out whether those frames or those packets carry some virus or worms or trojans, and for that reason we try to sniff those packets. You must be aware of Wireshark and many other sniffer tools are available. But now see, my switch initially work with some fundamental, like you have studied in switching, that switch never initially it will do broadcast, but later on it will do what? Unicast. Initially he act like a hub. Whenever he receives a broadcast, he will forward it on all the port except the port from where he has received the broadcast. This is the slight difference between a hub and a switch. No doubt we do not use hub nowadays, we are using switches, but it works on this technology, or it works on this feature that if I receive a broadcast from one port, I am going to forward it on all the port except the port from where I have received this broadcast. But later on you see he builds a MAC table, and then when he builds the MAC table, he never do forward broadcast. He will send those frames only to those ports which is mentioned in the MAC table always. He will not send it to all the ports. He will do filtering. So, if my switch is not going to send these frames on any other port except the port from where he has received the data flow, that is G0 by 1 in case of PC1, and then he will send it on G0 by 2 in case of server, then you will not receive these frames, or you can't see those frames. If you really want to see those frames for troubleshooting or for any other reasons, you can configure span on switches. So, you say monitor session 1 is nothing but some ID, and then you specify the source interface from where you want to receive those frames. So, like for example, you want to see all those frames which are going towards G0 by 2, and you want your switch to send a copy to this port. Here you might put some sensor, you might put some sniffer, you might have a PC with sniffer. So, earlier we used to have IDS, intrusion detection system. Again, it was long back, they stopped manufacturing IDS, and then they came out with what? IPS, intrusion prevention system. We do not want detection, we want prevention. And then later on they came out with NGIPS, next generation intrusion prevention system. So, in monitor in span switch port analyzer, or you can say port mirroring, we always see that we receive those information on a particular interface, and for that we configure the switch with this command. So, this is again a security feature, because see, my switch is not going to send you all this information directly. So, I need to request my switch to receive all those information, and for that reason I am doing what? Span or RSpan. RSpan means my server is not locally on a switch, it is somewhere else, some remote. Like for example, this is my another switch, okay, and then this is my another switch, and here I am having this the capturing server or sniffer. So, my PC and my server is located on another switch, and my sniffer is located on another switch. So, I am requesting all this information to send via VLAN, because VLANs can bring this information. So, I am telling my source interface will be G0 by 2 and G0 by 1, but my destination is what? VLAN say 10. So, I am asking a particular VLAN to carry this information to me over the trunk links. So, these are all trunk links. So, when I configure this on this switch, that whenever you receive this information from G0 by 2, send it to VLAN 10, and then I configure here monitor session 1, source is VLAN 10 and destination is this interface. So, what happened? The information comes along with the VLAN and it is being received by this particular switch. So, that is why the term is what? RSpan, remote span. the PC server and the IDS sensor is not located on the same switch locally, then it is called R-span. If it is located on the same switch, then it is span. Clear? I can't show you the practical of this because then I have to emulate sniffer, then I have to have 2-3 switches like that. But yes, we can do another topic which I am going to take now is private VLAN. Okay. Now, what is private VLAN? You have heard about normal VLAN, virtual LAN, nothing but you are trying to make a virtual LAN of your one subnet. You are breaking down this one particular subnet into multiple subnet and making multiple virtual LAN. The advantage of this is like you can have a security. If you don't want two VLANs should communicate with each other, you can reduce the broadcasts between these two VLANs, because VLAN 10 broadcast will be different, VLAN 20 broadcast will be. So, there are many reasons to configure VLANs on a switch: security, limiting these, reducing the broadcasts, okay, and all those stuff. But what is the importance of private VLAN? Why we go for private VLAN? Can anyone tell me what is the meaning of private VLAN? Why we go for private VLAN? You can write down. Anyone? What is the need for going for private VLAN? Again, this is coming under security, because yes, we are providing security. No one? Himanshu, Faisal. Security performance, okay. Separate the VLAN data. I am talking about private VLAN. The features you are telling me is for normal VLANs. Why it is called private VLAN? It is different from your normal VLAN. See, basically, if I want to provide security, like I remember when I was in class, when I was in say schooling time, everybody enjoy that schooling days. I also used to enjoy those schooling days. So, I remember not a single teacher would stop me from chatting with my friends. Okay. Not a single teacher can stop you from chatting with your friends. As soon as the teacher turn to write down something on the blackboard, you start whispering, you start giggling, you start chatting with your friends. In this case, or in a single classroom, it is very difficult to isolate people. Yes, I cannot chat with my friend next division or in the next classroom, because there is a wall there, physical barrier. But yes, the guy sitting next to me, I can immediately talk to him, though my teacher is a strict teacher. She is shouting, she is throwing duster, she is throwing chalk and giving bad remarks, and all those stuff was part and parcel. We used to talk. So, here the question is, if you really want to separate two people to communicate with each other, of course, we can create two VLANs. You can make VLAN 10 and you can make VLAN 20. You can put one PC into VLAN 10 and one PC into VLAN 20, and they won't communicate with each other. That is basic. But suppose if I want to isolate users in a particular VLAN, within a VLAN, I can go for VLAN access list. The first tool that was used to separate two PCs, like for example, I do not want a PC to communicate with the server in the same VLAN. So, I used to do it with a special tool on switches called VACL. Normally, you have studied RACL, that is router access list. Router access list works on router. It works on switches also, multi-layer switches. But here I am talking about a term called VLAN access list, where you specify that okay, this particular user cannot communicate with this particular server for so and so traffic, say HTTP traffic, or he can't do ICMP for this particular server. Within a VLAN, yes, possible with the help of VACL. I am talking about within a VLAN. Remember, router access list will work only when the traffic enters or exit the interface. That is why you see you apply access list either inbound or outbound on routers. And it actually triggers, okay, when the traffic crosses the router or it enters the router. So, yes, VLAN access list was very good tool for the traffic which is not going to exit or enter, it is going to stay within a VLAN, and that was VLAN access list. But again, VLAN access list became more complicated because how many statements you are going to add in an ACL. Like for example, if you have a requirement of one user not able to communicate with one server, second user should communicate with the server, but he should not communicate with another server in the same VLAN, and so on. So, they came out VLAN access list. I am telling you, na Adnan, I said if you have a user in a VLAN, say I am talking about VLAN 10, and this user, normal user, should not communicate with the server in the same VLAN. Normally what you have studied in basic CCNA, man, that if you place a user or if you place user in a particular VLAN, they can easily communicate with each other, right? You can't stop them because they are in the same VLAN, they will communicate. But here the question arises is, I want to stop this user to communicate with this server in the same VLAN, and that is possible with the tool called VLAN access list. VLAN access list you can define, you can tell okay, this user should not communicate with this server, and then you can apply it on VLAN 10. Router access list you can't apply it on VLAN. Router access list you apply on interface, either inbound or outbound, in direction or out direction, and it will trigger only when the traffic crosses the router. Okay. So, now VLAN access list was a legacy method, like old method. People getting confused configuring VLAN access list on switches. It is different than router access list. VLAN access list is applied on a VLAN to filter the traffic with statements. Okay. And if you do not design VLAN access list properly, it is not going to work, and it will become more complicated when you go on adding the statement. A time will come that you won't understand which statement is doing what. So, they said if you have a data center, suppose, and in that data center, suppose you are placing servers of many companies, you have taken a contract, you have gone into a contract with that company that we are going to manage your server. Every company server is a different server. This is one of the reasons. Data center with multiple server, and they want to separate them from each other. They do not want them to communicate with each other. They are different company server, man. So, it is the responsibility of the data center to manage them, to keep them separate, so that nobody get access among them. First reason. Second, you see, you have taken an internet connection from your building service provider or area service provider. Now these guys are non-technical people, like they don't know exactly the security. So what they will do, they will put all the connection into a single switch. Now if I keep all the subscriber on a single switch, they will be part of VLAN 1 and they can communicate with easily each other. So I can enter into someone's router who is a non-technical person, my neighbor's router, and I can format it, I can delete it, I can change the configuration also, because I know every Wi-Fi router might carry some default username, that admin and so TP-Link. You see all the routers, Wi-Fi router carry the same, and non-technical people, they are not bothered to change those username and password, they will keep it as it is. So I can enter into someone's router easily if I am a good hacker. Why? Because they are all connected to a common switch. So it is a risk. Forget about this building network, it is a very lower end problem. I am talking about an ISP. He is giving subscription to many such clients, and then he is placing all those clients under a common switch for internet, same problem. But yeah, he can do what? He can make multiple VLANs and put them in different VLANs. But then who is going to manage those VLANs? Again, a separate team to manage those VLANs for different subscriber or customers. So in that case, they came out with private VLAN. Now in a private VLAN, you have a concept of, I will show you. In private VLAN, you have a concept of private VLAN. If I tell you what is private VLAN, there is a concept of primary and secondary. In secondary, there are two, one is isolated and community. Isolated, primary, secondary. Now what is primary and secondary and what is isolated? So suppose this is my router or a firewall. This is connected to a particular switch and they are being placed under primary VLAN. These are all gateways. It can be a firewall, it can be a router. Gateway, internet. But now we have a requirement that we have two servers here, and I do not want these servers should communicate with each other. Simple, I put them in isolated VLAN. When I insert them in isolated VLAN, what will happen? They will not be able to communicate with each other. Simple. As soon as I configure isolated, they will be stopped, the communication will stop. But they can communicate with primary VLAN to receive net, internet connectivity. They can have their customers coming in. So what is the definition of isolated? The definition of isolated, if I do not want users in a particular VLAN to communicate with each other, I will put them in isolated. What is the advantage of isolated? They can't communicate with each other, but yes, they can communicate with primary VLAN. Now a requirement comes in, okay. There are matchmaking websites like this is shadi.com, a server of shadi.com. People visit this server for matchmaking, and this is PayPal. So I want that these two should communicate with each other. I want, because see, if I place them in isolated, they will not communicate with each other, but if I place them in community, they can communicate with each other. plus they can communicate with primary VLAN also. Yes, isolated VLANs means the user placed in isolated VLANs will not be able to communicate with each other, but let us assume man you are keeping a server of your company and then I am also keeping my company server in a data center, but we both do not want our server should communicate with a secret. Why I want my server should communicate with your server, man, you are my competitor. So, data center will do what? He will place this server into isolated. So, simple, I do not have to create any VLAN access list to stop them. Simple, I will configure isolated and their communication is stopped. Switch is not going to allow them to communicate with each other, though they are in same VLAN or say VLAN 1, native VLAN. This is the beauty of isolated. Now, you are telling me Shaadi.com and PayPal should have a communication, because once I get the database, I want to pay for that database. It is a commercial website, man. If you like the girl or a boy, then you have to pay them the charges. So, if you are trying to pay the charges, it should go via PayPal. So, PayPal and Shaadi.com should have a relationship and they should communicate with each other. So, in that case I will place them in community. So, what is the definition of community? Community means they can communicate with each other, they can also communicate with private VLAN, primary VLAN. You can have one isolated, but you can have many community. Community means suppose 4 more servers says we want to communicate with them, okay, they will remove those 4 servers and put them in community. But again, once again, community also cannot communicate with isolated. Isolate cannot communicate with community. Isolated means isolated. They cannot communicate with community. Community cannot communicate with isolated nor with any other community VLAN. Getting it? They are all now separate identity. But yes, community VLAN, isolated VLAN can communicate with primary VLAN. Primary VLAN can communicate with all of them. Understood the definition? Guys, understood the definition? What is the definition of isolated? What is the definition of primary? What is the definition of community? You can have many community VLANs, you cannot have many isolated VLANs. Clear?